Get your avocados ready because toast is back. All right. So, after 10 months of traveling this year in I don't even know how many countries, learning 2 new languages, Arabic and Russian, I am back in the studio in Montreal for a limited time to create and upload some content, not just for myself, for documenting, but also for you, my amazing, little Toastians. I don't know, my beautiful, beautiful listeners. For those of you who've been following me on Instagram throughout the journey, I know that I don't post enough. I try, but I try to live in the moment. Anybody who's seen me or traveled with me knows that I kind of just pick up the phone, take the picture, and just say, hey, can we just live in the moment? So that's what I did a lot of this year. And now I want to be back in the studio. So let's do this. I started the year off with Arabic and Egyptian Arabic in specific because I was going to, you guessed it, Egypt. And instead of talking about these large desert triangles that are on the outside of Cairo in a little town or big town called Giza, I thought, why not go to this new kind of tourist attraction that is gaining popularity, that is absolutely incredible, by the way. It is probably the nicest place I've been to in all of Egypt. It's kind of hard to say because obviously there's so much beauty in Egypt, but Siwa leaves that magical impression because, well, what is it? It's an oasis in the middle of the Sahara desert, okay? So let's start it off with, why did Siwa get famous? Well, aside from being an oasis in the middle of the Sahara desert, you have the history of Alexander the Great himself going to Siwa, on his way to Siwa, because he was going to the Temple of Amun, where he actually made it there. After leaving the coast, the Mediterranean coast, he had something like 200, 300 kilometers of desert. Luckily, he had a little bit of rain that helped him with the water, which is very rare there. And then he got to this amazing place called Siwa, which I don't even know how best to describe it. It's literally these 2 massive lakes in the middle of the desert with date palms, so palm trees that give dates, and just tree and olive trees all over the place. And so, on the bus there, as Alexander was doing for weeks of traveling by foot and horse, I'm guessing, and camel, sorry, he was basically traversing this desert where you don't see nothing. And for me, it was just hours. For him, it was days, weeks. And you get to this oasis and it's like such a strong contrast of what you're experiencing in this bland, dry, kind of mostly sandy, little bit of rock desert. And you get to Siwa and it's like an ocean of water, but it's actually just lakes, freshwater lakes, and these palm trees. And then also around it, you kind of have these more kind of desert rock formations that maybe you see in some films. Maybe I'll be talking about when I talk about my trip to Jordan. So Siwa is just spectacular. From the moment that you get there, you know that this is magic. And you want to stay longer than however long you already planned to stay because you're like, this is never going to be enough time. So what did I do in Siwa? I mean, what is there to do in Siwa? So one of the main things, of course, is just going to the lakes, enjoying the sunset on the lakes and just seeing these crazy landscapes. And then, I was kind of excited to just jump into the city right off that night bus. I was like, let's go to the center of the city. Let's see this castle that's kind of still standing, but it's made out of mud. It's like kind of these North African mud castles that they were making back in the day. Maybe you've seen videos of some in like Morocco or Algeria, places like that. So essentially, this was part of Libya. When Alexander got there, he was going to Libya. Siwa was in Libya, and it is still very close to Libya. So essentially, it's very far from Cairo, and you get there, and it's very different from the hustle and bustle of the city. No honking, nothing like that. It's super small. It's super calm. It's absolutely wonderful. And so I get to this mud castle. I'm getting to the top. Next thing I know, I kind of meet this couple, German, Spanish, and I joined them because they had a rental car and they're like, hey, we're going to these camps. And it ends up they have a lot of these natural hot springs. And so they go to the hot springs, which also have some cold pools, depending if you go to the cool ones or the less cool ones. So then what I found out was that Siwa was riddled with these natural springs. And so they have wells. They have the Cleopatra's Hole, I think they called it, where people just kind of hang around and they go jumping in the water in the middle of the desert, which is, just really crazy because it is a really small town and you still feel the dryness of the desert. And it's really still, an oasis inside what is definitely a desert. So we end up going to the hot springs, we chill, whatever, we hang out. And then they told me that they're going on a safari. And I try to get on the safari and I'm like, what's the safari? And it ends up that these safaris, which I didn't get on with them, but I ended up doing the next day, is basically getting on a 4x4. And they bring you into this part of the desert that's fully sand. They call it, I think, the Sea of Sands or something like that, because wherever you're looking, it's like an absolute landscape that looks like an ocean, right? Because there's dunes everywhere. So needless to say, these crazy Egyptian drivers, and I was so lucky, I'm going to get to it later, but I went alone. I didn't go with these tourists. I was so lucky because we were in a group of just Egyptians, which is very good for my Arabic, and then also ended up being a very nice experience moving forward because I met a lot of people. But let's get back to the dunes. I mean, we are driving super fast, and we're in the car with all of the men. There's one car of all men, one car of all women. It is an Arab country still, so they had the numbers that they could separate us, so they separated us. And so all the men in one, and so we are yelling at the driver. We're like, Abdullah, flip the car. And they're, we're trying to flip the car, or it seemed like we're trying to flip the car. Luckily, we didn't, but we had a lot of fun. I was scared for my life a lot. And yeah, it was just absolutely mind-boggling the entire time of how beautiful these things are and how grateful I was to be there in that moment, to be able to experience this. I mean, it was February, for crying out loud. Like, I should be cold in Canada in some sort of lockdown. I mean, who knows what's going on over there? And here I am burning my head off and wondering, like, should I put some sunscreen on or something like that? And finally, we stop at some point, do like sunset pictures. We go to this huge dune, and he pulls out a sandboard, which I had been asking for. I was like, hey, dude, if we're going on these dunes, you're going to let me freaking ride a sandboard, right? And sure enough, he's like, yeah, I'm going to let you ride a sandboard. And I said, okay, cool. So I went sandboarding, which is great because you get to go down. And I tried to do a jump, and I bailed because, well, it's tough to do it on a sandboard. It's just this wooden thing. It's not like the high quality snowboards that I'm used to or that other people, might have in different places, maybe that are more developed or have a bigger sandboarding scene, like in, I don't know, what is it, Iquitos or something? No, not Iquitos. That's Peru. But in Chile, where they do like the big sandboarding on the dunes. Anyway, so I had to walk back up the dune. It was a whole ordeal. Next thing I know, I'm befriending the Egyptians. We go out for dinner, and I'm a vegetarian, as many people may know. But I cheat sometimes because if it's a cultural kind of dish, then I'm down for this cultural kind of dish. So let's do this cultural dish. So they cook this chicken in the desert. I mean, we're in a Bedouin camp. And actually this would be more like Amazigh, which is like Berber. So we're in a Berber camp in the middle of the Sahara Desert with, it's like a desert hill, a sand hill with lights on it so that, the drivers can find it, even though they know their way around. And it's fully self-sustainable, whatever, solar panels and everything. And they cook the chicken inside the ground, inside the sand. Like, they put these hot coals around it, and it's kind of like it, it acts like an oven because the sand retains the heat. Many people who've been to Turkey have seen them probably cook the Turkish coffee in the sand. They stick it in the sand like that. It's pretty much the same idea, except just a lot more coal, and you're cooking a chicken. So I tried the chicken. It was good. And next thing I know, these people end up inviting me over. They're like, you should come tomorrow. We're doing this like birthday party. Come to our hotel. We're going to get you a good price. I'm speaking to the girls. The girls are like, yeah, we're going to talk to them. We're going to get a good price. And then you can come back to Cairo with us. And I said, wow, that's great. I'm going to go back to Cairo at some point anyways. So next thing I know, I'm inside, this camp. We're eating the chicken, and then we go home and we exchange some contacts, whatever. And it was really cool because the next day I ended up going to what is very famous in Siwa as well, which are these salt pools. Okay, so these natural salt pools. So as much as there are the freshwater lakes, there are also salt lake. And the salt lake is saltier than the Dead Sea. And I know a lot of Israelis are here saying, no, the Dead Sea is the saltiest body of water. Yes, because this Salt Lake doesn't really count. It's not big enough to be like a big body of water. So don't worry. You still have the title of the saltiest bottle of water. No, bottle of water, body of water. That's the one. Let's get some more mate. So I go to the salt lakes, or I go to these salt pools, actually, which is where they're mining salt. They're literally just grabbing the salt out. And I'm with the German-Spanish couple that I met on the sandcastle, and I bought a bunch of olives and dates, and we're exchanging them, eating some falafels and whatever. And then, like the Dead Sea, you float. You can't not swim or sink inside this thing, right? And I was warned by many people, do not jump in. And if I may say anything, it is do not jump in. Same with the Dead Sea, same with these salt pools. You don't want to jump in. Think of something saltier than you could possibly make out of just dumping salt into water, because this is like evaporated water with the original salinity. So if that's too scientific, that means that it was at the maximum amount of salinity, right? A maximum amount of salt per million particles inside water, and then it evaporated the water. So it gets saltier and saltier. So these smaller pools in a hotter place gets really salty, kind of like what happened to the Dead Sea, which is, below sea level and all of these things. So I didn't jump in. But at some point, I'm taking these pictures floating in this kind of gelatinous water. I mean, the water was really weird. I mean, you're looking at this kind of freaky consistency that, like, you could stand up fully upright vertical while inside this water, and like it's not even like pushing you from side to side. It's almost like being in some sort of jelly. And I mean, I really liked it. It was beautiful. It's scenic. You still have the Siwa Oasis, the palm trees, and all of these things. And the drive there is just, really good because you're kind of between the lakes, and it's a nice thing. What happens is I get out of the water at some point. And as you guys can probably see since my last Toastcast, I've grown my hair a little bit. Actually, the hair that you saw in the last Toastcast is still this hair. I haven't cut it once. Now, I kind of just turned my head at some point, and a little follicle of hair touches my eye. And this is why you don't want to jump in, because when something that salty touches your orifices, like your nose, your ears, your eyes, okay, it hurts. It burns. And so this thing was absolutely shredding through my eyes. It was trying to, get my eyes to the level of salinity as the salt and as the salt water. And obviously I don't want that. You don't want that. Nobody wants that. So I'm there cringing, crying, and I'm pouring water in my eyes, and I'm like, come on, help me. What's going on over here? And finally we got out and we got these amazing pictures, and it was a good experience. So fast forward a little bit, I get to see the sunset. I'm meeting up with this Egyptian group that I was on a safari with. And this is where it got really interesting, because I get on their tour bus, and they bring me to their hotel, and they got me a private room or whatever at the hotel. It was a really fancy hotel on the lake, and there was a big birthday. And it just so happened to be the birthday of the guy that I was connecting with the most, Malek. And so essentially, we're chilling, and I have like a beer, nobody else is drinking, and I kind of feel a little bit awkward, like, is this okay? And then there's like traditional music starts come on. And, by the Amazigh, the Berber people, that they're like playing their music, the weird instruments and things like that. And it was really, really special. And it was really interesting because in that moment, and this is, one of the big things that I get to take away from Siwa is I was kind of segregated from the men who were maybe a little resentful that I was speaking with the women quite freely. But the women were very curious as to, like what it's like to drink, or to not really have kind of these set of rules of like religion to follow and to kind of live my life by. And I really enjoyed it because, I was asking them, I was prying a little bit, and they're like, well, I'm sure you've like kissed or, broken some rules. I don't know what they're comfortable saying. And what I gather is that probably most or some, or maybe all of them have broken these rules, but they're under the pressure of speaking to me in front of other people, or even speaking to me who they don't know. And so they can't actually admit it. And so they have to deny it, regardless if those denials are true denials or not. And so it's quite an interesting cultural difference that, you have to deal with in this situation. And I really, really enjoyed it because of that, because I wasn't really sure, who's telling the truth, who's not. And I don't necessarily care, but it is such a different pressure to do. And this is kind of what these, Toast episodes are about. It's not just about like, hey, this awesome safari and these salt pools in the middle of the Sahara where, Alexander the Great was deified by Amun, and we still don't know what he asked Amun at the Temple of Amun, by the way. But really about like, what are the differences? What are the stories that you can get if you are open and you are curious? And I'm always open. I'm always curious. And it doesn't mean that I don't have moments where I don't care about learning more, or that I'm closed and I just want to stay huddled in my, heavy blanket and watch Netflix. But in these moments, I'm so appreciative that I'm able to experience this. And now, I felt like I had really good friends made in that moment. And, one, Malik, ended up inviting me over to his house. And so when we got, back to Cairo the next day, we left in the morning, whatever, he invited me to his house. And it's quite interesting because, he's an ex-Coptic Egyptian. And Coptic would be like the Christian version of Egyptians, but it's not actually Christianity. It's like based in that, right? So there's it's really complicated. I can't really inform you enough about it because I wasn't able to stay with him for long enough to get all of these answers. And it was really, really cool. And one of the coolest things I've ever seen was basically his painting that he had in his house. Very nice house. Very few, paintings, which really makes the ones that are there stick out a lot more. It's the Last Supper, but there's nobody sitting at the table. And, that really like kind of sums up some of my experiences in Egypt, and you can interpret it the way that you want. I just feel like we're looking for answers sometimes, and we're trying to give, these things, whatever it is, the ability to give us these answers, whereas like what happens when we remove them. And that's kind of what I get from that picture, in a nutshell, for me to describe it in 20 seconds. But Siwa Oasis was one of those magical places that a lot of people who go to Egypt don't see. And everyone who goes talks about it. They're like, you need to go to Siwa. Siwa's the best. But it's so far, is what everyone says. There's no flights. You need to take these buses. And these buses are long. They're usually night buses. They're painful. You're probably stuck with somebody very close to you. They're not super nice Greyhounds with Wi-Fi and all of this stuff. So you need to, as I say in a lot of my podcasts, and I'm going to be saying this a lot in my coming podcasts that are coming out now, I need to suffer. I love suffering because that's how you enjoy it, right? When I'm going to get to these hiking stories, it's going to always be, how painful, how hard was it for me to get to the top? How hard was it for me to learn Arabic? How many months of mistakes and mispronunciations and saying the wrong things did it take for me to finally reap the rewards of being able to speak to these people in Arabic, right? And my Arabic is not even that good, but it doesn't matter. I was able to create that connection with these people. Even though a lot of this wasn't done in English, I was still able to do a lot of this in Arabic. And this kind of pain, this process is the enjoyment, right? It's about the way, it's about the journey, not the destination. We've heard it. Siwa is about that. And Siwa starts off these new episodes of Toast in such a great way. And I can't wait to share more stories. Next episode, still going to be about Egypt. And then we're going to move on to some other countries that I've been to. And I can't wait to share these experiences with you. And I really hope that you guys have some value in this. And if you do, you can share it or not share it. You can downvote it. I don't know if there's downvotes. You can dislike it on YouTube. I'm doing this because I think that there is some value and because it brings me so much joy to share some of these experiences with you guys. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you guys whenever I post the next episode, I guess. Good to be back. Toast out.